In January 2013, the USS Guardian, a Navy minesweeper, ran onto a coral reef in the Philippine Sea. The ship could not be pulled free. The Navy cut it apart, piece by piece, where it sat, and struck it from the fleet. The commanding officer lost his command. That is what running aground means in the United States Navy. It is the mistake that ends careers, destroys ships, and triggers investigations that follow officers for the rest of their lives. The entire culture of the service, every chart, every sounding, every rule of navigation, exists to keep deep water under the keel. Which is why the contract the Navy signed on July 13th, 2026, sounds at first like a contradiction in steel. $2.2 billion for a new class of warship designed to run aground. On purpose, not once in an emergency, but hundreds of times as its core mission for a service life measured in decades. Why would the Navy pay billions for a ship built to do the one thing its captains are trained never to do? The answer begins 4,000 miles from any American shipyard scattered across the Western Pacific. Look at a map of the island chains that run from Japan through Okinawa, past Taiwan, and down through the Philippines. Military planners call it the first island chain, and it is the terrain where any conflict with China would be fought. Thousands of islands. Most of them have no port, no pier, no crane, no fuel depot, nothing. Under the Marine Corps' force design concept, the Corps has spent years rebuilding itself around a single idea. In a Pacific War, small Marine units armed with anti-ship missiles would scatter across those islands, turning each one into a firing position. The Corps has already built the units. Marine littoral regiments now train for exactly this mission, equipped with a weapon called 𝗙𝗵𝗶𝗃𝗃, a naval strike missile mounted on an unmanned truck chassis, capable of killing warships more than 100 miles offshore. A few launchers on the right island can close a strait to an enemy fleet. It is a sound plan with one enormous hole in the middle of it. How do you put a missile battery, its launch vehicles, its fuel, its generators, and its Marines onto an island that has no infrastructure at all? And then, days later, how do you move them to the next island before the enemy finds them? The Navy's existing answers all fail that question. Its big amphibious ships, the San Antonio class, cost around $2 billion each. They draw too much water to approach a beach. They carry helicopters and landing craft that cannot lift the heavy trucks, and they are far too valuable to park inside the range of Chinese missiles. A $2 billion ship loitering near a contested island is not a solution. It is an invitation. What the mission actually requires is something the Navy threw away a generation ago. A ship that drives its own bow onto the sand, opens its doors, and lets vehicles roll straight from the hold onto the beach. The tank landing ship, the LST. For most of the 20th century, the fleet was full of them. The last American versions, the Newport-class, were retired in the 1990s. Their famous over-the-bow ramps folded away for the last time. Since then, for roughly 3 decades, the United States Navy has not operated a single ocean-going warship that can beach itself. The most powerful fleet on Earth built ships for every mission except the one that now sits at the center of its Pacific strategy. The first attempt to fix that went badly, and the way it failed explains everything about the ship that finally emerged. In 2020, the Navy launched the Light Amphibious Warship Program and asked American industry to design a new beaching ship from scratch. The requirements seemed modest: small, simple, cheap. Then the bids came back, more than $350 million per hull, for what was supposed to be the affordable workhorse of the fleet. The number stunned the program. For a few million more, you approached the cost of a guided missile frigate. The program stalled, requirements were rewritten, budgets slipped year after year, and the Marines watched their island strategy sit on paper without the ships to execute it. So in 2024, the Navy did something it almost never does. It stopped designing and went shopping. Instead of a bespoke American warship, it would buy a proven commercial design and build it under license. In December 2025, the Navy announced its choice, the LST-100, from the Dutch shipbuilder Damen. This is not a concept. The ship exists. Nigeria's Navy already operates one. Australia has selected the same design for its own fleet, planning up to 8. The United States Navy, an institution that has designed its own warships since the age of sail, reached into a foreign catalog and bought the answer, because the catalog ship was real and affordable, and the custom ship never left the drawing board. The result is the McClung-class, and by American warship standards, everything about it is small. It is 328 feet long and displaces roughly 4,000 tons, about 1/6 of a San Antonio-class amphibious ship. Its top speed is 15 knots, slower than the container ships it will share the ocean with. The Navy's requirement called for a draft under 12 feet, shallow enough to push the bow into the sand of an unsurveyed beach. And the bow is where this design earns its existence. It holds a set of clamshell doors that swing open above a loading ramp. The approach works like this. The ship runs toward the shore under power and drives itself aground, deliberately bow first. The doors open, the ramp comes down, and then trucks, missile launchers, fuel, and around 500 tons of cargo drive directly from the cargo hold onto the beach. No port, no crane, no pier, no waiting for landing craft to shuttle loads one at a time. The entire logistics problem of the island strategy solved by a hull shape. When the hold is empty, the ship hauls itself back off the sand and disappears toward the next island. There is a stern ramp for loading in harbors, a heavy crane on the foredeck for moving cargo where beaching is impossible, a flight deck aft, and berthing that the base design rates for more than 280 people, against a Navy requirement to carry at least 75 Marines. Its armament is 2 30mm guns and mounting positions for machine guns, almost nothing by warship standards. Aboard a fleet that measures firepower in vertical launch cells, the McClung-class carries roughly the armament of a patrol boat. That is not an oversight. It is the entire philosophy, and the price tag is where the philosophy becomes visible. The $2.2 billion contract covers the construction of up to 8 ships, rising to $2.6 billion with options. 8 hulls, for roughly the price of one San Antonio-class amphibious ship. Run that math from a commander's chair. A $2 billion ship near a contested island is a risk no admiral wants to sign for. A $275 million ship is a calculated loss the fleet can absorb. Cheapness in this design is not a compromise. Cheapness is a weapon. If a fleet of beaching ships bought for the price of a single traditional amphib changes how you think about naval power, hit that subscribe button, because how the Navy is building these ships may be even more radical than the ships themselves. Start with who is in charge of construction, because it is not the Navy. In the 2026 Defense Bill, Congress directed the Navy to hand construction management to a company outside the military entirely, a model the service has never used for a warship class. The contract went to Tote Services of Jacksonville, Florida. Not a defense prime, not a shipbuilding conglomerate. A commercial shipping company, a firm that operates cargo vessels, now standing as the vessel construction manager for a class of United States warships. Tote will run the subcontracts, Bollinger Shipyards, building the first ship in Pascagoula, Mississippi, and Fincantieri Marinette Marine in Wisconsin, building 4 more, with the deliberate use of commercial production practices, including constructing ships in parallel at multiple yards instead of one hull at a time in one dock. To understand why anyone thought this was necessary, look at what it is reacting against. The Navy's flagship shipbuilding programs have become bywords for delay, frigates running years behind schedule, carriers delivered late and over budget, submarines backing up in the yards. Against that backdrop, the McClung program is a controlled experiment. Strip out the custom design, strip out the traditional management structure, buy a proven hull, and let commercial practices set the tempo. The early moves came fast. Bollinger received its lead ship award in September 2025. Fincantieri received a $30 million contract for long lead materials in April 2026. The vessel construction manager was signed in July. The first ship is projected for delivery in the fall of 2029 with a program of record of 18 ships and plans that could ultimately stretch to 35 hulls. If the model works, it will not stay confined to the landing ships. It will become the argument for how the Navy builds everything small. There is also history buried in those 3 letters on the hull. LSM, Landing Ship Medium. The designation is not new, it is resurrected. The last time the Navy used it was the Second World War, when American shipyards launched 558 of them in barely more than a year, some going from keel laying to commissioning in as little as 53 days. They were 203 feet of flat-bottomed steel with bow doors, each crewed by fewer than 60 sailors, and they carried tanks and Marines across the Pacific, island by island, through the final campaigns of the war, including the landings at Iwo Jima. Sailors joked that the bigger LST stood for Large Slow Target, and they were not entirely wrong. The ships were slow, thinly armed, and utterly essential. Every island campaign in the Pacific ran across their ramps. 80 years later, the Navy is reviving the designation for the same ocean, the same islands, and fundamentally the same mission. The first ship of the new class carries a name chosen with equal intent. USS McClung honors Major Megan McClung, a Naval Academy graduate and the first female Marine Corps officer killed in action in Iraq, in Ramadi in 2006. When she is delivered, the ship named for a Marine will exist for one purpose: putting Marines ashore. None of this means the concept is safe, and the debate around these ships is genuinely unresolved. The objection is obvious enough that critics inside and outside the Pentagon have been raising it since the program was born. A 15-knot ship with 2 30mm guns deliberately driving itself onto a beach inside the engagement range of enemy sensors, drones, and missiles looks less like a warship and more like a target. A beached ship cannot maneuver. It cannot run. For the minutes or hours it sits with its bow doors open, it is the most vulnerable object in the theater. The skeptics argue that in a war where commercial satellites can photograph anything and loitering munitions can reach anywhere, the beaching ship died with the last century and the Navy is buying nostalgia. The Marine Corps' answer runs the other way. Survival, in this doctrine, does not come from armor or speed. It comes from being small, numerous, and boring. A 4,000-ton hull with a low silhouette can hide among islands, coastlines, and the endless commercial traffic of Asian waters in a way that no big-deck amphibious ship ever could. It moves at night, beaches before dawn, unloads in hours, and is gone. And the arithmetic carries the rest of the argument. An enemy that finds and kills one McClung has removed a fraction of a distributed fleet, not a capital ship. The Navy is not betting that these ships cannot be sunk. It is betting that they can be risked, and that a Navy which cannot risk its ships cannot fight with them. Would you rather defend one ship worth $2 billion or accept losses among 8 ships that together cost about the same? There is no comfortable answer to that question. There is only the $2.2 billion bet the Navy has now placed on the second option. So the contradiction in the title resolves into something close to cold logic. Every grounded warship in the Navy's history was a failure, a navigation error, a career-ending accident on a chart. The Guardian died on a reef because it was never meant to touch one. The McClung-class inverts that entirely. The grounding is the mission. The beach is the destination. The ship is built to do, on purpose and by design, what sank its predecessors by accident. It exists because the next Pacific conflict, if it comes, will be decided across islands where the most valuable ship is not the biggest, the fastest, or the most heavily armed, but the one that can throw itself onto an empty beach, open its bow, put a missile battery ashore, and slip back into the dark before sunrise. The United States Navy spent 80 years building ships to stay away from the shore. It just spent $2.2 billion to go back.